On Careers in Discovery this week, I am absolutely delighted to be joined by Vern de Biasi of BenevolentAI. Vern, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Tom. Good to be here.
Really good to see you. And I'm really excited to talk about your career today, Vern, because there's a lot of it that I want to dive into. A career that's taken you from process development to business development all around the world, different types of companies, and really sort of you know, at the forefront of the sort of AI revolution in drug discovery and drug development as well. And there's a ton of stuff I want to get into. Before we do that, you've recently joined Benevolent AI as VP of Business Development, company that some of our listeners will probably be familiar with, but some may not be. Can you tell
Sure.
us a bit about what you're up to at the moment and where Benevolent is at?
Yeah, of course. I'm very happy to, and really great. I mean, yeah, it's been a journey just on the career side, but at Benevolent, it's it's a fascinating company because it started very much at the beginning of when AI started becoming talked about. So about 10 years ago, the company
Mm,
set up, and it was one of the early pioneers of working in that space, and really driven by the fact that some of the founders and some of the people at the beginning of the company came from a drug discovery environment and could basically see that things could be potentially tried and done differently. And that's where the company really started. So the idea was very much around building technology to advance pipeline much more effectively or efficiently. And then the idea was to actually use those assets that we created to then demonstrate how well the technology worked.
yeah, I
And once
see.
that was proven, then the idea now is to use that technology with partners. And we've had some big collaborations with large farmers, AstraZeneca, Merck. We
Hmm.
did some really amazing work during COVID, where we, like many companies across the world, they were looking for molecules or assets that could potentially be used when we hit the pandemic because no one was expecting it. And we did a lot of work with repurposing and bringing sort of viral features back into the platform that we had
Right.
and identified a molecule, a lily molecule actually, that baricitinib, which was for a completely different indication. And we thought from the work that we did that it could be used for the COVID situation. And that work then was picked up with Lilly, and we partnered with Lilly and did some clinical studies. And in
Yeah.
fact, now it's an FDA approved molecule. So it's actually used in hospitals for patients that have severe COVID. And that was, and that's frankly why a company like ours exists. Okay.
Hmm.
So it wasn't our original molecule, but the idea is to bring medicines to patients that actually do make a difference, right? And
Yes.
that's the whole premise of companies like Benevolent. And that's just an example of how the technology very quickly from January, I think by the end of the year, it was approved. So there's a lot of good stuff that can be done with technologies like ours. And we've got things in the clinic and the company's pushing forward. So yeah, it's been there since what, Christmas, I think. And it's been a real journey. So I'm really pleased to be part of the team. And the
Yeah.
technology stack is actually, the more I get into it, the better it seems to look. So that's always pleasing as well.
Well, it's good to discover it that way.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, no, no, you think it is, but the more you're in, actually,
Yeah,
the better it seems to be. That's
no,
good.
that's great. And there are, of course, a few competitors of yours in the market
Yeah,
and a few companies applying tech. Everyone's got a different angle on it, right? But applying technology
sure.
to accelerate the drug development process. Where are the focuses for Benevolent, and what are the things that you guys are particularly strong in?
Yeah, I think the thing for Benevolent is that the technology was always developed to accelerate our own internal platform. So it was
Mm,
always built for us.
yeah,
So therefore, the team is half data scientists and half scientists. So we have laboratories up in Cambridge. And with those laboratories, we can test out some of the things that the stack is generating and then feed that data back into the system. So therefore, it actually improves over time.
yeah,
So the fact that it was built for scientists is how we say it within Benevolent, allows us to actually validate very quickly within our own labs whether it's working or not. And I think the other major thing is that we've been around for 10 years
yes,
and we've learned a lot.
yeah,
Okay, so there's a lot of companies now with labels like AI, which are proving still yet to prove their technology and validate their technology. But we validated both for identifying new targets and also for generating molecules. with our own pipeline, which is in the clinic, with our partners' pipeline, because they've taken in targets. In fact, we had I think, press release this week where AstraZeneca's taken a new target into their cardio
Yes.
pipeline. And then we've also proved it on our own pipeline. So we have 2 or 3 points of validation, our internal pipeline, partners pipeline, and also the repurposing work that we did under COVID with the Lilly molecule, which tends to show that our stack actually can generate things of value. And that you need time for that, because this technology is great, but it's not a silver bullet, never has been. And I think you need some time and traction within this space to actually be able to prove yourself. And there are companies out there like us that have done that, but there's a lot of companies that are very early on that have yet to do so. So that's the difference, I think, that Benevolent has.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point. It seems like AI in biotech is starting to move into a more mature phase, right? Whereas there was a lot of companies that were sort of wanting to get into it that didn't really find their niche, or they didn't really find the right path, or maybe technology didn't work in the same way that they wanted it to, and that kind of thing. But everyone was trying to do it. I think a lot of that noise has started to subside, and now it's about, okay, fine AI, but to do what? And what is the evidence? And as you say, how have you validated it and all that kind of thing? And I think it's getting to an interesting point where it's about, well, so what? What's the impact of the technology?
Correct. And I
I
think
think that's a
now
good
there's
place
some
to be.
data. Yeah, and there's some data now that's just been starting to build up, because it's not going to get you from A to a person, from an idea into the clinic or into the market, in 5 minutes. So it just you need a bit of time to actually show that where it's best value. And there's now enough data out there that shows that it's certainly in the discovery space and in the clinical space, it's starting to make impact. So it takes time. People have to be a little patient, but that's just there's a lot of hype around it, which we have to fight. But there's enough evidence now to show that there's value here.
No, absolutely. And so you've come in in a VP business development position, and I'm assuming that that's largely focused on those partnerships and finding the right partners for the company and putting the programs together and that kind of thing. But tell us a bit about what you spend your time on and what your focus is.
There's a lot of so it's been interesting because I started as a scientist,
Yeah.
and in fact I love the science. I love being in the lab. Okay, so really enjoyed the lab work, and then over time you move to have maybe a team, and then you get less lab and more team, and you get more involved with people than you do with actual tying things together in the laboratory. In the moving from science to BD has been interesting, and it was a particularly difficult learning curve for me, because I started as a scientist and you have a different mindset as a business person. And I have to acknowledge some work. So right at the beginning of my BD career, which was when I worked for a previous company, I got some mentoring in there from a friend of mine now, who's Nahid, who's the CEO of Cyclica, which is the company I used to work for. And he helped me very much kind of set some guardrails around the things that we need. And we were a very small startup. I was employee number 22 at that point.
Right.
So it was a quite small startup, and it was an easier place to learn. Whereas now, it's a bigger company, it's a different requirement. There's a lot of, you do a lot of background work to understand companies that you're looking to interact with, where their opportunities to help them could be. But also it's around building relationships with people, and very much BD I found is a relationship thing. There's some technical aspects as well, but it is all around how well you interact with a company. Because to be honest, even if you've got the best technology, but we're a difficult company to work with, you're not going to come, are you? It's just the same as any industry. So in that sense, it's really around making sure that you have something that can add value to that particular company, but also the fact that you could work well together in the way in which Benevolent works with partners. It's about a partnership and a collaborative partnership to actually get to the right scientific answers potential collaborators are looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to come back to that transition to business development, because I think it's an interesting one. I think a lot of people make that transition within a company, but you actually moved to make that
Yeah.
transition, which I guess might have been in some ways a cleaner break, but I'm sure had its challenges. But we'll come back to that. Um, as you said, you started out as a scientist, and PhD in analytical chemistry originally.
Mm.
To go back to the very beginning, why science? Why chemistry? Why drug development? What were the origins of this career for you, do you
Mm.
think, Vern?
So goes back to school, but I just
Mm,
enjoyed chemistry at school,
mm,
and that was as simple as it was. I had no passion for it necessarily. It was just the thing that I used to enjoy. So it was natural then to do a chemistry at university because it was a thing I enjoyed.
yeah.
I was hopeless at physics, always was. So we knew that wasn't going to be a path. But chemistry was the place that I seemed to enjoy. Went to university, and then honestly, it was about, and it's going to sound a little corny, but actually getting into an industry that could help people.
Mm,
Maybe when I was younger, I had those big dreams of wanting to help more, but actually getting involved in applying the science in an area where you can actually help people was something that was attractive. So started in pharma. Okay, and when I was in pharma, actually, I'm also, it's a personal note, but I'm vegetarian as well, and that all
okay.
started when I joined a pharmaceutical company because it is a legal requirement to test on animals to test safety. And I couldn't square that circle. So it was either changed what I did because I didn't have to eat meat,
Right.
okay? But we do have to use animals. So for me, mentally, that was just a way of allowing myself to get involved in an industry
Okay.
which I wanted to be, but actually had some real issues with actually how things were done at the time, right
Yes,
at
I
the
see.
beginning of the career. And then as you learn more, then you understand better why you do it and everything else. But when you first join, it all seems a bit odd, and therefore that was a squaring of the circle. So yeah, so then did a PhD while I was working actually. So I did that part time,
Hmm.
um, which was okay, day job and then a PhD, and just enjoyed the science, and that's why I did it part time because I just enjoyed the bench
Yeah.
work and I enjoyed learning that side of things. And then the career was around very much. I feel you need to build foundations in what you're hired. So they hire you in, a company hires you in because you have a certain skill set, maybe you're a certain type of person that they're looking for. And then you're really in the first job that you really have to build foundations in terms of showing that you can do what you've been hired to do and
Right.
get the confidence and trust within the company that actually, yeah, okay, so you're a chemist and you know what you're doing. And
Mm,
then from those foundations, then you can have sort of a perspective in the company of doing other things. But my personal view is that you need to build foundations for a while, get set so that the company trusts you. And then with that trust, then opportunities will probably arrive after that because they know you and they know what you can do.
yeah. Absolutely. I think just going back to that point around the animal testing, that's a really interesting point. I think obviously you found a way to kind of balance the scales on a
Yeah.
personal level. I guess there may be people listening to this who are struggling with that question themselves,
Mm.
that they are interested in a career in the industry, but have issues with because there's still animal testing, right? It's still a big part
Yeah,
of,
it's a legal requirement. Yeah.
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 Um, what helped you to come to terms with that aside from sort of vegetarianism? What
Mm.
was the you said as you learned more, you started to understand it a bit better.
Yeah, and I think there's two aspects to that. First is how the animals are actually looked after. I
Right.
mean, the people that do that looking after, it's like having a pet at home.
Yeah.
They have a lot of care and attention, and that's something I didn't fully appreciate until you get into a company where this happens. The animals lead very inverted commas good lives, but they're there for a purpose. But and the other thing is some of the work that we do in essence is too risky to go straight from
Mm,
lab to human. So therefore there needs to be a complicated biological system to test these things in because you can start with cells and then you can go to maybe tissues and then
yeah.
you can go to organs, but in essence you do need a more complex environment. And I think the where we are today is some of that technology that's around in terms of organoids and 3D cellular systems are actually enabling us to move into spaces and reduce the level of animal
Yeah.
testing that goes on, because the technology is now catching up, and also the regulators are now pushing more of that technology side and looking to reduce as well. So because they're regulatory requirements, companies are obliged to carry this out. So,
Mm.
to get drugs approved, you need to. But also now the regulators are actually pushing alternatives, which I think is really, really, really good,
Yeah.
because the technologies are out there, and there's a lot of technology out there now that can be done, that don't involve animals. So
Yeah.
that's really cool. Really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you touched on there, some of the computational technologies as well can support
Yeah,
that. And it doesn't
yeah,
necessarily eliminate the need for animal testing, but at least it eliminates the unnecessary testing.
correct. Yeah,
Yeah,
there's always
yeah,
the aim to reduce, for sure.
yeah, absolutely. Um, and so, looking at then how your career progressed, Vern, you got into, as you say, you got into a pharma company. You found your way to, was it GSK originally, or did you come to
Yeah,
GSK
it
later?
was
Yeah,
the Smith line. It was the Smith line part of GSK, which then
yeah.
we merged.
And that, you progressed through the ranks there, but that also took you on a really interesting journey around not just the industry, but the world.
Yeah, yeah, and I think so. That's a good point. When I had confidence, and the company had confidence, and I was in SmithKline just as the merger was happening with GSK, and I just happened to be simultaneously hassling my boss for a new role because I was kind of getting a little bored, and he put me forward for a role in the new GSK at the time, which involved a role in a former GW, like so Welcome site, which was
Right.
based in Italy. Okay, and I have Italian roots, and I don't know if that's the reason he put me forward, but he said, look, why don't you apply for this job? And that was a very valuable lesson, because I never actually thought I'd get the job, and I hadn't
Okay.
planned for getting the job. I was just, if you like, the SmithKline person for this particular role, and I got the job, and that was a very, very important lesson to me, is only apply for a role that you've actually thought through,
Mm,
if you're successful, what the consequences are. And that may have been a bit naivety on my part at the time, but in essence, I did get the job, which meant moving to Italy from the UK, which I kind of realized that would be the case, but I'd never really considered getting the job. So therefore, it
yeah.
was a factor, but you never really think about what the consequences are there. So I found the first 6 to 9 months when I was based in Italy really quite stressful, because it was a new site, people I'd never met, a new company, if you like, that was being formed, new labs which I had to set up. But actually, it was probably one of the best experiences that
Okay.
I had. Okay, so having taken the jump into that, so you couldn't say no. So I did the role. First 6 to 9 months were very stressful, and then I started turning the corner, and the team was formed, and we were doing okay, and things were okay, and I was there 2 or 3 years. And at the end of it, it felt good, and I got feedback that was positive, and
Mm,
I felt as though I'd actually achieved something quite personally, quite important for myself,
yes.
as in going into a completely different environment and demonstrating a level of success. At least that was what was said. So for me, that was a big confidence thing, because I wasn't obviously very confident when I walked in, because I didn't really know what I was doing.
Of course.
But then over time you do, and that confidence grows. And then at that point, I got into very much taking on things that I had no experience of.
Okay.
So that step allowed me to then not be concerned about jumping into areas that I didn't really know and understand, and that has kind of stayed with me. So that was a really seminal moment for
Mm,
me in my career, in my personality, actually, in
yeah.
terms of tackling new things. So that then allowed us to then take on other things.
That's interesting. I think, there's the career side of that, jumping into things that you perhaps aren't quite ready for, which is always, I think, the best thing to do. That, you're perhaps almost there, but you don't quite have the experience yet. Um, but also, I always find parallels between that and people who have moved internationally, because the first move is hard, right? The first
Mm.
move is the one that you worry about missing your family, and what if everything's different, and what if I don't like it, what if I don't make any friends, what if I
Yeah,
Did
Yeah,
you speak Italian at the time?
I could understand.
You can understand. Okay.
I could understand Italian. I had very little. Well, I had some Italian speaking, but
Yeah.
at the end of the day, I just always remember having massive headaches because what you do is you're listening to them in Italian, which you can understand. You're translating into English
Yeah.
in your head, and then looking to say it back out in Italian, going the other way. So at the end of the day, yeah, I period of time, but after 6 months or so, I was pretty fluid. And also the technical side, I didn't have the Italian words for all the technical stuff
Right.
that we were doing because that's not part of the
It,
normal vocabulary, right?
no, you're not going to learn that, are you?
No,
Outside of that environment, for sure.
no,
So I think, the first move is always the hardest one, but then I find that people who've done that move then find it really easy to move other places.
yeah,
Um, Now they don't always go as exotic as China, but you
no,
did.
yes, yeah, that was an opportunity. So, and I think built, as you said, from the confidence of having done one,
Mm,
and then the company wanted to set something up in China. Some laboratories in China were looking for some people that had some experience in drug discovery development to go out and help the team out there, which was fresh out of a lot of them were less experienced. Um, it was fantastic. I mean,
yeah.
honestly, we'd never been to my wife and I had never been to China before, so we didn't really know what we were going into. That was I think, part of the attraction, but also the fact that she had moved to the UK because she's Italian, and then we both moved over to China. It was just a phenomenal experience. I mean,
Mm,
it was hard work, if I'm honest, as a foreigner, because the language, you stand out. It's all different. It really is all different. The way in which people work, the way in which things are done. It's just a learning experience. We had a lot of support from the company,
yeah.
GSK at the time, so that's obviously very helpful and beneficial. But you have to find your way, and it was a great experience. I do it in a heartbeat. It was a massive learning experience as well.
Yeah. And I think it's one of those places that, people in the Western world, as you said there, you don't really know what to expect. I guess,
Mm,
Japan would be another one, probably for a lot of people if they were moving to parts of Africa or places like that, they wouldn't quite know
mm.
what to expect. Um, I guess what was different to what you expected when you got out there? And if someone was thinking about a move to China, what would be the things that you would tell them about working there and living there?
I think the thing that surprised us, because we went there 2011, is just the pace at which things work. I
Okay.
mean, they are very, very, as a country, they execute very quickly in
Right.
terms of getting things done, and that is really, and just the desire to learn as well. So
Mm,
the team were always looking for how to grow, how to make themselves more valuable, and there was very much a great environment to work with the folks within the company because they were all very keen to do well and for the company to do well. And there was a real desire to be successful,
right.
which I'm sure is around many companies and in many countries, but it was very obvious there. Okay,
Mm,
much more obvious than maybe you tend to note in other geographies that we've worked in. So that was the thing that was the most, and also the way in which business is done. So in two things that I've noticed in the way people approach work. In China, it's about relationships. It's about who you know, how you know them, how well you know them, how well you establish a relationship before you do business.
okay.
Okay, so when I first arrived over there, I spent a considerable amount of time going to companies that we could potentially be doing business with, but had no business to give.
Right.
And therefore, it was about establishing a personal relationship with these companies, meeting them, getting to know them, learning about them, and then learning about GSK. So that when you did have business, there was a level of, oh, I remember you. Yes, oh,
Mm,
yes, of
mm,
course,
mm.
that's right. We did this, we did that, and everything else. And it was very much around the relationship then allows you to do good business.
Right.
Sometimes in the West, you tend to build relationships over the business.
Yes, true.
So you have something to do, therefore, that relationship will form as you're doing the task or the piece of business. But then once the task is done, pretty much the relationship tends to sort of drift away.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Whereas in China, the relationship stays. And in fact, I still get messages from people that I either used to work with or companies that we're looking to work or that we did work with. Oh, you're at a conference, let's meet up. So the relationship stays a long
Yes.
time after the business is done. And that's a very different way of working. And that's just something that was obvious, became obvious as we stayed there. And then it's just different in the West to the East.
And do you think that we're going to come on to this a bit later, but do you think that was a good grounding for your move into business development later on?
Yeah, I guess so. I think you probably was doing a little bit of, I guess, light business development
Yeah.
when I was in China, because you're in essence looking for companies that could act as third parties for us to do various activities. So you were kind of doing some soft business development, and building relationship is actually very important with
Mm.
anything. But that was, yeah, it was good grounding for sure. Absolutely.
Yeah. Because I don't know, I get the sense that we are perhaps moving back towards more of that dynamic today. I think because it's so easy to be transactional, people are
Yeah.
sort of looking for a little bit more than that now in the West as well.
Mm.
Not everybody, but I guess there seems to be more emphasis on relationship than there was perhaps 10 years ago, as you say, where it was quite, this is a piece of work I need doing. Can you do it? Great. Okay, well, let's do it.
Yeah. Yeah. That may well be true. I
Yeah.
think for me, it's always relationships have always, if you like, been the important part, and that's also when working in teams. So if you're given a team to lead, for me, if you can get the people right, the rest is technical, and the
Yes.
technical stuff you can solve, whatever that is, or maybe you can't, but you can deal with that. But unless within the team the relationships are right or the team is right, then you're actually not going to move that well, because that is really the foundation of being a successful, achieving success in a company, is getting the
Yeah.
team. So that's how I've always, if you like, led, is to get the team atmosphere right, and then in essence the rest of it will kind of take care of itself with the right support and funding or whatever else that you need. So for me, relationships have always been important, and in fact, that's why I think I enjoyed China so much, was because you had the opportunity to get into more relationships, and relationships mattered to the other side as well, if you like.
Yes.
So therefore, it was a quid pro quo. Yeah, that was good.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you took a slightly different turn then in your career and went to a very different culture to China,
Mm.
and moved out to the US. And
Yes.
tell us a bit about that transition, because it's a very different way of working
Yeah,
and way of
very
living, right?
different. Yeah, very different way of working and living. It's funny. I think I still remember the first day we landed in the US. I was a little bit jet lagged, but the kids just could read things, right? So they could see things and they could understand things. And
Yes.
the the site that we had in China was a few hundred people, so it was quite intimate. And then I personally moved to a site where there's 3,000 people, where you kind of just know the people in your building or on your floor that you work with. It was a very different environment, and in fact, for us, it was like a breath of fresh air, because it
Mm.
was less. It was a bit more understandable how things work, and we've been in China for 6 years, so we kind of knew how it all worked by the
Yeah,
time we
yeah.
left. But actually, it was a lot easier just to drop in. You could walk down the road, or you could see that you could understand the building names, the streets. You could work out where you were going. You didn't have to pronounce things correctly to
Right,
make
yes.
sure that you could actually move about. And it was just, for us, it was a great breath of fresh air, actually, because it just took a bit of stress out of the system. But you know, don't get me wrong, I'd go back to China in a heartbeat. We
Mm.
just loved it, and America was just, the opportunity just opened up, because as a foreigner in China, you have access to everything you need, but you don't have the same access that you have in America to things that you might need or might
Right,
want,
yeah.
right? And that's very, very different. And the working culture was again another example of change, so
Yeah.
another adaptation for sure.
Yeah, although from the sounds of what you said about China, I've always found that the US, in terms of work ethic, they kind of put us to shame a little bit, and it sounds like it was similar in China as
Yeah,
well.
yeah, no, it was. I think, yeah, the work ethic in both countries are
Mm.
different to the UK, absolutely for sure.
Yeah.
and you'd always get in early, and people are already there, right? So I used to get in the office about 6:30, and that people were there. So it is what it is. They'd go early, they go home early,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
is fine. But basically, the work ethic is quite different.
I found when I worked out there, that became a bit of a competition around who could get in the
Oh, okay.
earliest.
Okay. Yeah. No. There was definitely a group that would get in
Yeah,
at certain times for sure. But
yeah,
yeah, less competition on that front. But yeah, just a different approach.
yeah,
It's a different approach.
absolutely. And I think, sometimes the assumption that people here in the UK make is that the culture in America is very similar. And there are some similarities, obviously, but I guess, you had a different perspective, having been in Italy, having been in China, you probably picked up on some of the nuances and the differences pretty quickly, I would have said.
Mm.
What were your key observations about the differences in working in the US to working in Europe or in the UK
So in the US, it's task. So you come together over a task, and
Mm,
and the task drives the activity. I think I found that there was a desire to complete and to get things done, and also to use. I guess it was more technological. I guess the work that I was doing in the US. So there was more technology involved, and using technology to solve problems.
okay.
In China, there was less technology around, and it was more people were putting in the hours to get the stuff done. Whereas in the US, it was very much trying to work around, trying to make it as efficient as possible to make it. That's now just looking back, that's what we were
Mm,
trying to do. And the tasks were just different. The sort of work that I was doing
yeah.
there was quite different. And looking for new technologies in that space. But it was very task driven in terms of the objectives of what we were trying to do. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That makes sense. And so you'd come to a point then with your career at GSK that you were running a sort of process and analytical development group, and very focused on sort of the hands-on practical elements of making
Yeah.
drugs. Um, and then you made a move to as you said earlier, a small company, very different to
Yeah.
GSK, applying technology to drug development, and you moved into this partnerships, this business development role.
Mm.
Um, Tell us about that transition. That must have been a lot of change all at once.
Yeah, it was. And I think, that basically my time at GSK had finished. So we were on assignment, or I was on an
Right.
assignment at GSK when I was being moved around to do these things. And then the assignment finished. So when we were in the US, the assignment finished, and therefore it was time to go. They take, company takes you rightly back to where you started, which was the UK. So we came back to the UK, but didn't have anything to do in the UK at
Mm,
GSK. So therefore I had to find a new job. So did that with this small company which I knew, and then joined Cyclica, which were based out of Canada. So we come back to the UK,
yeah.
and I joined a company that was based out of Toronto. So the time zones were out. So that's just the way it worked out.
Mm,
But what I could see there, and there were three things that attracted me to that particular company, and it's basically firstly was the people, because I'd met them all on a trip to Toronto at the time, and I just blown by just the enthusiasm that you had. I remember I'd come from a site where there was 3,000 people to the company where there was 20 all sat on one floor in Toronto, and that was so the energy was different. The technology was intriguing. It was different to other technologies in the same space at the time. Frankly, I didn't know whether it was going to be better or worse than the other
right.
technology because it was too early. But it was something different that I could understand could potentially be different or could be better. At least see that. And the third thing was the way in which they were approaching the business, the way in which they wanted to work and actually drive partnerships with others. And so, therefore, those three things, I said to Naheed, who was the CEO at the time, I said, yeah, more than happy to join. And he was grateful because I'd come from a large pharma, and I could understand large pharma perspective, which is where
Hmm.
they were trying to break into, and therefore could provide some insight on how maybe large farmers think,
Yeah.
and actually could talk to large pharma in a way that maybe a startup doesn't fully appreciate, if you like, some of the complexities of the background in a large pharma company.
Yes.
So it worked for both sides actually, and it was terrific. It was really good, and I really enjoyed the small nature of the company. The people were great, and even though, frankly, my office was a spare room, that was in essence how it worked. Obviously, I
Yeah,
worked different hours, and it was it was a slightly difficult transition, but actually one which was real positive. Actually, so there's another step, and my, if you want to call it a career, but my path has been very zigzaggy. So, and that's not necessarily a bad thing.
no.
It's just that it's just the way it's been, and therefore, with that, you learn new things. And I learned a lot working with Cyclica for sure.
And you mentioned earlier that you'd sort of you'd broken the barriers, like I suppose the mental barriers in terms of going into something that you hadn't quite done before already. So that part of it, that part of the resistance you might have faced was not there.
But then,
But then there's still this transition to then learn to be really good at business development, right? So
mm.
how did you go about that?
Just worked a lot with going out on trips with people that were already in Cyclica. So there was
Right.
a small team, okay, working with those guys and learning from them basically. So they were great. Okay, so yeah, it was a good time, and we were just doing a lot of the time because this was pre-COVID. So this was
Mm,
2019, back end of 2019, so September. So with Arthur and Linda, we'd go out and we'd do trips. We'd go to sites. We'd do a lot more of that than potentially that we do now, and you
yeah.
just learn on the job basically, and go to conferences and just learn by doing. Frankly, Tom, to be honest, and that's
Yeah.
how it was. You could read stuff, but actually, until you put in a meeting with someone who wants to know, and you have to try and do your pitch, then that's the best way is actually doing that. And that was that was a learning experience, but it was I had some good teachers, so that was cool.
Yeah. I think I've always found that learning sales techniques and things like that is useful. It's usually hard to remember them when you're in that moment, right? And the pressure's
Very
on.
true.
And
Yeah.
I always remember my first executive search pitch. I was pitching for a COO position, and
Hmm.
I'd been trained to ask loads of questions first, right? So to really qualify the client. But the expectation from this, so I was pitching to the CEO and the head of HR, and the expectation from their side was that I was going to pitch, not that they were going to answer loads of questions.
Yeah.
So I started out and asked a few questions and that kind of thing. And after about 5 minutes, the CEO said, "Right, that's enough of that. Tell us how you can help us." And I remember my stomach tightening up. And
I wasn't expecting that. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
No,
and go on, sorry.
no, keep going. No, sorry.
No, I was just going to say I must have done okay because we got the business in the end. But
Okay.
you have to, you can't learn to operate in those moments without being in those moments, I think.
Yeah, you have to learn and listen carefully and be able to think on your feet. And I think it's a bit of an art, to be honest,
Mm,
because it is all about it's about relationships and establishing that relationship with the other side of the table, and trying to understand where they're coming from and trying to see if you've got some of what they're looking for. And if you haven't, then by all means be very clear, because then actually it doesn't help. Just
yeah,
keep going if you know it's not going to work. But it is an art. I think there is a science obviously behind it, and there's
of
techniques and
course.
whatever.
Yeah,
But it is more so of an art, I think.
yeah, absolutely. I think everyone approaches it in a slightly different way, right? You've got to bring yourself
Yeah,
to it and be authentic with
yeah.
it. And had you been developing an interest in the commercial side of the business prior to taking that step, or was it just the opportunity was good, or
Yeah, the opportunity was good. I think the company I'd known, so Cyclica I'd known,
yeah,
and it seemed like a good thing to be doing. I hadn't particularly looked to move into that space, but you know, I was on the buying side at GSK, and then you sat on the selling side at Cyclica, and it's some of that you kind of know and appreciate, but I hadn't necessarily looked to move to the selling side, and
right,
that was just the learning that Linda and Arthur helped me with, and others in the team. I just remember those two guys right at the beginning, working well, and we do catch up. So at the end of every day, so 9 o'clock in the evening my time, we do an end of day with those two
mm,
guys, so that we just do, because it was 4 o'clock for them in the afternoon, so it wasn't too late for them. So we'd always catch up. So that way we established a bit more of a relationship, even though I was obviously far away. And it just worked out as a team that worked really
yeah.
well.
Yeah, no, that's good. It's important to have those guides there, isn't it? People who've been there and done it, and kind of,
I pitched to them a number of times, and it was always stressful.
The
yeah, this
harshest feedback that you had?
absolutely, yeah. You didn't quite say this. No, that you've got to remember to say that. So yeah, no,
Yeah,
it
yeah,
was good. They were great. No, good fun.
yeah. Fab. And so, we've covered quite a lot of ground here, Vern. I suppose, going from starting out in a pharmaceutical company, adjusting to that, growing your career from a leadership perspective, different countries, moving on to the commercial side of things, a huge amount of ground that you've covered. And you mentioned that one of the lessons you've learned has been make sure that you think through the consequences of jobs that you apply
Mm,
for.
yeah.
And it sounds like another one was kind of around, don't worry too much about having all the experience. You can learn that, but if it's an interesting opportunity that can be worth pursuing. What else would you say have been kind of key learns for you over the course of your career so far?
Live with the fact that you feel an imposter. Okay,
Okay.
because some of these things you're not trained to do and you've never
Yeah.
done. So, and I do not suffer, but I do live with the fact that I'm not skilled or not trained, or I'm not an expert in a number of things that I've done throughout my career. And you just learn. An ability to want to learn, I think, is
Hmm.
is really important. And then just yeah, that would be another thing that I particularly learned. And then honestly, working with people, it's about just being genuine and just being yourself with them and not trying to do things that you can't or shouldn't do. And as I said, I think somewhere in this conversation, it's just getting the atmosphere in a team right. And just if you can get that right, and people obviously want to work and do the right job and the right thing by the company because it's their personal pride and whatever else it is. But
Yeah.
actually, just having strong working relationships within a team is massive. Okay, it really it allows you to get that 10% or that extra thought or that thing that oh yeah, it just allows those extra things to happen in an easier way, and
Mm.
hopefully reduces the level of tension that could be within teams of characters and whatever else, and just deal with things very openly, very quickly if you're running a team, so to
Yeah.
get things straightened out. So I would say those things. Don't think about your consequences. Get the atmosphere in teams or working in teams right, and even if you're not the leader of the team, help the team have a positive atmosphere by how you work and how you work with your colleagues within a team, and then actually do take the jump if you have the opportunity, because I could not have learned or experienced as much as I had not done that. And
Yes.
that's something which now I look back on and just grateful that I had the opportunity to do it and then took it. And then obviously support that you get from your family to do these things, because you don't do this on your own, right?
No, of
When we went
course.
to China, there was two of us. When we came back, there was four of us because we had twins. So
Yes.
you know, there's a lot of that side of things that needs to also, it's a massive amount of support that you get from your family to do that,
Yeah,
the loved ones.
absolutely. And I think you kind of touched on this earlier that that move to Italy, because it was an international move, but also because it was moving into something that you didn't quite 100% know how to do, that gave you a lot of confidence to then take those
Yeah.
steps beyond that. Um, for those people, because I think fear holds a lot of people back in their career, or
Mm.
an assumption that perhaps they need the experience before they take the job. Um, any advice for people who might find themselves in that situation, that want to move forward but are kind of holding themselves back a little bit?
Yeah. No, I've lived with fear of doing new things for a long time. I probably still do today, to be fair. But I think just see what the positive outcome would be if you were to do it, and let that
Hmm.
guide you. So I think beyond the step that you have to take, and think about what you could gain having taken the step, and that ends up driving takes away some of the fear, because actually
Yes.
you do get so much more having taken the step, far more than you would ever get had you not. And and it is difficult, because I've had the experience a few times and still probably do today, is actually the concern that you have going into it. But the fact that if you just do it once, then actually that drives away a lot of the future concerns, because you've done it
Yes.
and overcome it. And then it's just that first one. So it really is about the benefits of looking at the benefits rather than looking at the step and seeing what you would gain from that, then can somehow help you take the ladder to go across.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important to bear in mind as well that we all have a tendency to catastrophize things, right? And sort of
Oh
think, well,
yeah,
if I make this move, I'll never be allowed back in the country, and then what do we,
correct. Yeah, yeah,
usually the
that is
outcome's
true.
not that bad.
It's never quite as bad as you imagine it can be. Correct. That's a real good point, Tom.
Yeah. And then taking it all the way back to Benevolent and what
Mm.
you're up to now, you gave us a bit of a sort of snapshot of where the business is. What can you say about what's next and what's coming in
Well,
the
we've
near
had,
future?
yeah, I mean, the company's had quite a number of sort of transitions, really. And I think
Mm,
we're now very focused. We have a new CEO. We have a biotech focus for our internal pipeline and a biotech focus in terms of the technology, which we've proven to ourselves and to others works, to work with companies to give them access to that technology as well to help accelerate, in their targets or designing new chemistry.
yeah.
That's what we're trying to push through now. And now that we've got the validation, we've got the team focused, or the company's focused on the outcomes, there's a real opportunity, I think, for Benevolent to actually turn its technology much more broadly with partners to help them sort of create new medicines for
Mm,
people. And there's a lot of interest. So I've been in the company, 4 or 5 months now, and actually the more we talk to people, actually, the more positivity we get back, which is
yeah, it's good.
nice. These things take a bit of time to mature, but there's a lot of positivity around what we're doing and actually what we have. And the fact that we have scientists as well as technology is important for folks because it means
Yes.
that we actually care about what we're doing. It's not just a set of technologists trying to design something, but actually scientists that we have in our labs actually use it and actually getting molecules into the clinic on the back of it. So
Right.
that really makes a difference. I think that's some of the positive feedback we're getting is because of that as well. So yeah, no, I can see good things. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm excited actually for where we're going and the opportunities we have.
No, it's good. And I think, a lot of companies have been through transitions over the last couple of
Yeah,
years, right? It's been challenging out there, but coming out with more focus, I think, is always a positive
yeah,
step.
yeah,
Um, and
absolutely.
yeah, we wish you the best of luck with it, Vern. Thank you so much for
Cheers.
joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for the time, Tom. Good to speak with you.